Hey Randy, thanks for joining. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming on.
Well,
I'm
you're
glad we could do
welcome.
this. Awesome. I'm glad we could do this. I know it's been a little kind of long time in the making here, but I'm super excited to kind of have you on, dive into your story a little bit because I personally think it's a super interesting story. Something I really respect. And I'd love to get the message out to everyone that's going to watch this. From my perspective, you've had kind of you've reached that rock bottom part of your life and you've really turned things around and just risen and become a really productive, valuable person in society, which is just something that not everyone has on their resume, if you will. And so I'd love to hear kind of, um, I guess, if you can rewind the tape a little bit, go back to the beginning of how you hit kind of rock bottom, what that looked like, and just paint that picture for us a little bit. And then we can go from there and just kind of dive into the rest of your story.
Well, sure thing. It started with you know, way back, my mom left when I was about 7 years old, and I was left with my dad. My dad was always working to make ends meet, and I had a lot of time by myself, a lot of idle time. And I managed to get in a little bit of trouble here and there. And I didn't realize that a lot of the ways I processed my emotions was getting in trouble, whether I was lighting fires or you know, uh, throwing stones at birds or stealing from the stores. We had to roll pennies as a boy to eat. So if I didn't have it, I took it to get it. And I created a lot of dysfunctional bad patterns as a child. And I didn't realize that this was a lot of ways I processed my emotions. And I started doing drugs when I was 12. And I started with marijuana. And that went to drinking alcohol, and fast forwarding that story from 12 years old up through grade school to high school. And when I was in high school, I started partying a little bit more. I was a weekend warrior. And then I got out of school. I did really well in school. I made the principal's list, honor roll since sixth grade. And it wasn't that my school was a way for me. I first started getting good grades in sixth grade because I didn't want my dad to whoop my ass as much. And come to find out, that didn't stop him. But I still really like to get those good grades because it gave me a way to lose myself into my academics. But when I got out of school, I went to electronics school for a year, and I wanted to get the heck out of the house because I had a bad relationship with my dad. And what I started doing after school and electronics school, I started doing, different types of drugs. I got involved with, doing, whether it was, psychedelics, PCP, you, you know, acid, uh, cocaine. They didn't have methamphetamine where I'm from in Baltimore, but cocaine was available. And then I started doing smoking cocaine. And that's where it all started going downhill. Got involved with that for about a year, and I started seeing some people getting hurt really bad. And I wound up walking away from it for a year. And then I came back to it. I used to park my car at the house and walk to the neighborhood bar. And I was on my way back from the neighborhood bar, and there were some guys on the corner selling crack. And one of the guys put his hand out, and I looked down and I said, "What are those, 50s?" And he said, "No, they're dimes." And I said, "Give me five of those." And that's all she wrote. That time I got addicted to crack cocaine, and crack cocaine made me lose everything in Baltimore. I lost my job. I lost my car. I was in the process of losing my girlfriend, and I wound up having some people after me, and they wanted to take my life in Baltimore. So I wound up getting on a Greyhound bus, and I came out here to live with my mom because I was scared for my life, and I just wanted a fresh start. And I wound up coming to Arizona. And out here
What
in Arizona, um, I couldn't
what
get
age
away
was this
from
at?
coke.
What age when you walked out of that bar and you saw that guy with with crack, what age were you at that time?
At that age, I was about probably 21, 22, almost.
So you started smoking marijuana when you were 12, and
Correct.
then when did the when did the other drug use start, and why did you start that? Was it later when you were 15, 16, 18? Like when did that next kind of chapter start with drug use?
Well, the next chapter really started when I bought that crack on the way back from the bar. I was able to be the recreational guy. I always had money. I had a good job. I had a nice car, a great girlfriend. I was involved in church. I was an altar boy, lector for 4 years. I volunteered at the church. I was in a bowling alley, bowling league. I worked at the pet store. I was a meat cutter. I was very active. And at 21, about 21 years old, when I did that crack, it I was finally on the other side of the fence where I become the addict, or where I'm from, they call them cluckers. And a clucker is somebody that gives anything and everything for drugs. So I sold everything, I stole things to get drugs. That was 21 years old, right there.
What was going through your head when you saw him? He held out his hand, and why did you make the decision then to say yes? Did you ever think back and ask yourself why why was that the pivotal moment?
Well, because I was walking home drunk from the neighborhood bar, and I was a recreational drug user. So I could take or leave drugs. So at that moment, I thought I was strong enough just to take it or leave it. And I didn't realize the power until I did that crack that night. Because they say that sometimes you don't get addicted to something right away. And if you leave it alone, sometimes you go back and then it can be curtains. And that was curtains for me. And I wound up coming to Arizona, and I still had the problem when I got here. I wound up picking it back up, and then that's when it really got bad.
And so you moved back out to Arizona to live with your mom. Um,
Mhm.
why did you make the move?
Well, I made the move to come out to Arizona because I wound up beating up the main drug dealer in my neighborhood, because he pistol whipped me, and I took the gun from him, and I whooped his ass in front of his girlfriend in the back alley. And he sent his henchmen up to put it on me. And then they came back later that night to want to take care of me for good. And then that's when I called my mom, and she sent me a Greyhound ticket. And I went to the Greyhound station and came to Arizona.
Wow. It that sounds very similar to Dana White, who is the CEO of UFC. He had the mob after him after he wouldn't pay rent. And so he just left and went to Nevada and started his career as well. But but for you, you landed in Arizona and then you started the drug habit back again. What happened then and how bad did it get? What was that like and how long did it last?
Well, I got to Arizona when I was 23 because I wound up living the madness for about a year and a half in Baltimore before I came out here. Because crack will take it from you quick. And I was out here at 23 years old, and I would, when I drink, it's like a gateway for me. It lowers my strength, and it makes me want to come back up. So I like to go fast kind of guy. So if I drank, I was kind of down and I wanted to come back up. And then I went looking for it and I found it. And what happened out here differently is that my attraction was stronger to it than it was back in Baltimore. So I got more addicted this time, and I wound up going to prison 3 different times out here. And it did take everything. I lost my kids. I lost my fiance. I lost all the respect to my family. I lost jobs. It was pretty bad.
Were you ever homeless, or were
I
you
have
able
been
to?
homeless.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What's
I've been
that like?
homeless. I, well, it's where, I got kicked out. You know, I lost, well, I evicted out of an apartment, and then I wound up, staying in a real small apartment with my girlfriend again after getting out of jail. And, in and out of jail, I lost count at 30 times going to Pima County Jail. And I've been to, several rehabs starting in Baltimore, coming out here. I've been to at least a dozen halfway houses and homeless to the point where I don't have a place and I'm living in my car, to where my car breaks down on the side of the road and then I continue on foot to where I keep trying to find ways to get cocaine. And the last time I ended up uh, robbing for drugs, and that's what got me caught. I got caught in a robbery, and that was my last crime. And I got 5 years for armed robbery.
You're obviously a smart person. Um, you said you went to jail 3 times. I'm assuming when you get to jail, you sober up and then they release you in some way, shape, or form. Why did you go back a second, after you get sober? Why did you go back a second time and smoke crack again, and then a third time when you seem to know right from wrong, um, and you know good from bad? Why do you think you went back and did it again and again?
Well, it's like asking somebody, why do they quit smoking cigarettes 50 times? Everybody with any type of brain knows that smoking cigarettes going to give you cancer if you keep doing it. And we all know it's bad for us, but what happens is it's an addiction. And when you become addicted to something, you have an obsession for it. It's kind of like I was 274 pounds. I got addicted to food. And it's just like any addictions, like switching seats on the Titanic. It's all going down. You have all the best intentions, just like a vase full of good intentions is only a vase full of good intentions without actions. So as much as you have these great intentions to not do these stupid things that that are bad for you, it's a compulsion to use drugs. And what it came down to, it was my way of numbing my childhood trauma, because I didn't know how to deal with my childhood trauma of my mom leaving, my dad beating me, and having kids in the neighborhood pick on me, and you know and I come to find out I got PTSD, from my childhood abuse, and I also have bipolar disorder. And when you have these mental struggles, it's can't handle feeling. And if you had to really boil it down, and why did I keep um, taking those penitentiary risks? Because I couldn't handle the way I felt, and I couldn't handle feeling. So that was my way of taking away the pain, was by doing cocaine. And when you smoke cocaine, it takes it all away, so that you keep wanting to chase the dragon, so to speak, so you don't have to feel.
So it got to a point where you were willing to rob. Um, was it a store? What did you rob exactly, and how did you get caught?
Well, at the last one, I robbed somebody at a bank, and I dropped my cell phone, and I got away. Well, I thought I got away. Well, when I got to the place where I got to, and I got my crack, I realized I didn't have my cell phone. And the police, they found my cell phone. And that's how they caught me, by looking in the cell phone and finding out who the cell phone belonged to. And then they had the person I robbed ID me in a lineup, and that was all she wrote.
And so you go to jail um, for 5 years, you said?
That last time, 5 years. The first time I did 2.5 years. So I have almost about 8 years, because I did other county time too. So all of it equaled about 8 years in prison. I spent my life in.
Wow. Okay. So I didn't realize the first time was also a significant amount of time as well. Wow. Um, and so what happened, was it during your prison sentence that you kind of were at that crossroads and said, "Hey, I gotta turn my life around," or what was it about that last time that you didn't go back to your old patterns? Why did you make the shift? What was that pivotal moment? How did that all transpire?
Well, the last time I went to prison, it was on a level 4 yard, and they have 5 levels of security in Arizona, in a state penitentiary. Um, Level 1 is like a DUI, a very petty offense. And level 5 is where they call it the walls. They don't let you out. And I went to a level 4 yard. See, the first time I went to prison, I went to a level 2 yard, and they call that Camp Snoopy. Well, a level 4 yard is where they let the people out of a 5 yard down to, and violent offenders. And my crime was considered a violent offense because I robbed somebody and I used a weapon. And uh, that time when I arrived on the level 4 yard, they had gun towers, it was controlled movement, and there was a bunch of real scary people there. And I was scared for my life. And what I realized is that if I didn't do something about it this time, that I was going to come back for a lot longer than 5 years. And so I decided to make a change. And that was February 23rd of 2006. And that story goes, I was on my prison sink in my cell, standing on the sink, and I smoked a joint, and I was blowing it into the vent. And I had a couple guys watching point for me, they call it, and that's watching out for the guards. And I got down off the sink, and I remember being stoned. And at that time, I was fighting for my two boys, Justin and Luke. And I asked myself, what kind of dad goes to prison on drug related crimes and gets high, risking a dirty urinalysis test, losing all privileges, getting my visits taken, and getting thrown in the hole and getting a new charge? So that was February 23rd of 2006. So I decided the next day to make a change. And that was February 24th of 2006, when I was in prison for over a year, to where I decided that I was done with the bull crap. And I was tired of emotionally eating. I was tired of trying to numb my feelings. And then the February 24th, I went all in with every ounce of my heart to change. And that's when I started working out the next day. I wound up losing like 70 pounds in like 5 months. 4 or 5 months. I went from 274 down to 205. And then I wound up I kept working out and even went down to 193.
Wow. What age were you when you went in 2006?
2006, let's see. Um, I was in my early 30s.
Okay. And how the heck did you get weed in jail? How does that happen?
Well, you can get anything you want in prison.
How
Um,
does how did you get that? How does that happen? Like explain that to me because from an outsider looking in, uh I wouldn't like how does that happen? Just explain to me how you got that, how you came into possession of weed in jail and got away with smoking it in jail. Like how does that happen?
well, one of the things, if you ever watch the movies, is that convicts are very creative and they're very resourceful. There's several different ways, whether it comes in through the guards, because you have dirty guards, just like there's dirty police officers. Some of the guards will bring it in, or you'll have one of the people in the kitchen that works for the state. They bring it in, like supervisors, or you have people coming through visitations where they swallow balloons and they kiss their significant other, and that significant other swallows the balloon and throws it up later. Or they do it in other ways. They call it keystringing, where they stick it up the backside and they bring it in that way.
Got it. And so after that day, when you decided this is it, I'm going to turn my life around, what did you do to turn your life around? Like what were the steps you took? And how did that progress?
Well, the first thing I did is I decided to start working out and giving everything I could with my heart, working out. And then I decided to sign up for some college courses. And I started, my first college course I took was childhood development. It was to learn how to be a better father. So when I got out, I could be a father for my kids that they needed. And I wound up learning more about myself. So I furthered my education in psychology by taking some more college courses to learn more about myself and cognitive restructuring, childhood development, like I mentioned, and thinking straight. And I got involved with a lot of different programs in prison to where I could get credits that could help me release early. And I really did a lot of these programs too, because I wanted to get out of my cell, because they don't let you out of your cell but once every 3 days to take rec. And anytime you get out, you're going to the shower every 3 days, or you go to controlled movement to the chow hall and back. That's the only time you get out. So it was a way for me to also get out. And I would visit the library a lot, and I wound up becoming a librarian. So I had access to literature all the time. So that was another way that I decided to educate myself. And then I started working out with a lot of physical fitness, doing yoga, doing a boot camp in there, doing workout on the rec field. They make you work out in there. So it was a good way to do it that way. So I started working on losing myself in my education and working on a body, mind, soul connection.
And why do you think so you said that they make you work out in prison. Why do you think it's because they, want people to burn off steam and they're a little bit more relaxed? Is that part of it, or what's the reasoning behind that, do you
Yeah,
think?
that has nothing to do with it. Well, maybe the authorities in there would like to think that that's why they want you to work out, but in there it's very racial. There's like 4 races. It's black, white, chief, and Hispanic. Uh, and what you do is you pick a race to run with, and so every race wants to get really strong in the case of a riot, and they call it something pops off, that you can be there to support your people in the event of a riot.
So it's not the guards that make you work out. It's just your race, you
Inmates,
call it?
yes, your
Inmates.
race.
Got it. And
It's
so,
very primal and very small minded.
hmm, how did you work out? Was it just body weight, or was there a weight room, or what did that look like?
No, they don't give you weights in there, because they would be too dangerous. You would use body weights and pull up bars and creative workouts that way. At body
And
weight, as in your body weight, push-ups, jump squats, regular squats, bear crawls, sprints, jogging, yoga.
and did you learn all of this through literature in the library? Like, how did you learn how to work out, the movements? or was it just you did what you thought worked at the time?
Well, I did play some sports in school. Um, I wrestled for 4 years, played baseball, and my dad was an athlete. So I did learn a lot of different stuff from my father as a kid. And I learned a lot from, playing high school sports. Uh, but I also learned a lot from, like Men's Health, Men's Fitness magazines, workout magazines, or workout books in the library, and I would study forms and stuff like that. And I would also get people from the kitchen to bring me labels to find out what was in the nutrition so I could start tracking my nutrition so I can lose the weight and put myself in a calorie deficit and grow muscle. So I learned a lot from literature, and also, like you said, figuring it out, being consistent, because it always comes down to being consistent, structured, and disciplined in order to get the gains that we seek. So that's how I learned it.
And so you said you started some type of boot camp in prison. Is that right? How did that did you just do it for your fellow inmates to in case there was a riot, or did you do it for other reasons?
Well, really, it was a serendipitous thing. I was on a level 4 yard, and I worked out for my race, and I wanted to get fit. And then when I went to a level 3 yard, because I was a well-behaved inmate, there was this guy that kept asking me to do his men's aerobics program. And when you're in prison, the last thing a guy wants anything to do with is men's aerobics. So this guy, his name was Rob. He was so kind. He'd always carry a Bible around. And this guy, he probably asked me 50 times to do his men's aerobics class. And one day, it was just the final day that the straw that broke the camel's back. He was walking up to me, and I know he was going to ask me again. And I went like this: "Hey, Rob, if I do your class, do you promise to never, ever ask me again?" And he said, "Absolutely, absolutely." I said, "Okay, I'll do it. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 5 a.m." Because it was at 5 a.m. 3 days a week. And I joined them the next day, and quite frankly, I fell in love with it, and I didn't look back. And I became like his helper guy, and I wound up being like the top dog in his program. And I I had to go to another yard because I was well behaved. So then I went to another yard, but I lost the program there. So I had to be creative. So I created my own boot camp in the way I wanted to do it, not necessarily the way Rob wanted it done. And I used all that education from the years prior to implement a program on a minimum security yard. And that wound up taking off really big because I had access to better equipment. I wound up having influence to be able to get medicine balls ordered, to have a body fat scale ordered. By a lot of requests over and over. I wound up working for the recreation department, and I had 30 to 40 men in a group, and I had a waiting list. It was actually months, out of a waiting list of people waiting to get in my program. And one day the warden called me in, and I thought he was going to take my program. Because when you have a lot of bad things happen to you in the past, you kind of expect bad things to happen. So he actually said, "Brown, I just want to tell you, I'm seeing a great improvement in the people in your fitness program with their disciplinary records. And I want you to start teaching this to other prison yards." And I was like, wow, me? I got credit for doing something good, because I wound up smoking crack for like 10 years. I lost 10 years of my life out there on the streets, in and out of every place you can imagine. I've had dozens and dozens of jobs, relationships, and I finally was doing something good that was actually changing people's lives for the better.
That's amazing. And so what happened then? So did they transport you to other prison yards and you did these boot camps once a week, 3 times a week? What did that look like?
Well, I was teaching people there so they could train over there.
Wow.
Kind of like they keep you there. They don't want you going anywhere. Even though it was a minimum yard. Um, that's kind of the way I pulled that one off, is by educating other people that went to other yards. Um, when I got released, I I remember being very fit, and I wound up moving into my mom's house, because that's the deal. You have to get released to somebody's house. So I begged my mom to allow me to come to her house, and I broke all her trust and everyone else's trust, because you can't trust drug addict no matter what they're saying, especially a cocaine addict or a meth addict or a heroin addict. Those are the three main bad drugs. Now you have fentanyl that's killing people. Um, anyway, I got released to my mom's house, and it was less than a week, and I was getting ready to leave to go get a job. And she said, where are you going? And I was going to go back into sales, because I used to sell motorhomes for two of the top RV people, like Fleetwood and Winnebago. And I went to sell motorhomes, and my mom said, "Oh, please don't do that." And she was like, "No, honey, please don't do that, because that's uh, a lot of the salespeople, and what I was doing were really shady." And she knew if I was involved with people being shady, that I would return back to my bad habits and behaviors. So I said, "What am I going to do, Mom?" And she said, "Well, do what you were doing in prison." And I said, "What, boot camp?" And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what am I going to call it?" She said, "Brown's boot," or she didn't say Brown's boot camp. She said, pardon me. She said, "Mindful fitness." And I was like, wow, I like that. That's got a good ring to it. So I got on this bike right here. I asked my stepdad, "Can I borrow your bike?" And that's a 15-year-old Walmart bike. And he allowed me to borrow his Walmart bike. And it had broken gear shifter. I would use pliers to change the gears. And I had this Tupperware pack that I would carry in my backpack. And inside of this backpack, I had I had $800 that I worked for, by the way, for 5 years in prison. And I got out with, the 800. I took 600, put it in bank one, which is Chase now. They kept the $600, and they kept the $600 because I wrote bad checks before prison. I had $200 left, and I picked up this. I got a Cricket phone that I paid $150 for, and I had $50 left in my pocket. And I used to think I was the coolest thing since sliced bread with this. I would be like, "Brown's boot camp, this is Randy," on my bike, and getting all breathy. And what I would do is I would ask people on the trails. I would get these little memo pads, and if I got a check on there, that meant that I got the people to come into my class and got them to sign up for one of my programs. And all those times I would call somebody, I would go into a local store and I would say, "Excuse me, can I borrow your phone to make a local call?" And they would say, "Sure." And what I would do is I would trick people's caller ID by calling them from a Walmart store or a Hallmark store or wherever, to get them the answer, so I would get another chance to help them out, join my program. So that's kind of how I started. And I started with one class, and I had so many people together on the first one that I had to break it up into 2 days, because the building couldn't hold that many people. And I started off with one class, and we wound up going up to 14 classes. And we had the most boot camps in Tucson, 14 classes. Been on the news 5 different times, all three networks here in Tucson, Arizona. Um, it's been quite the journey.
It's amazing. It's actually very inspiring that you've kind of gone through this journey of real ups and downs, and you've made something of yourself that's impressive to a lot of people. Um, so now, now what's your business like? I mean, you have classes all over Tucson still, right? I mean, you do classes all over the place, um, for boot camp, right?
Yes, yes, we do. We're north, east, south, and west, and central. Um, and now we're actually Soul Fitness. And we changed the Soul Fitness like 6 or 7 years ago.
That's
And
amazing.
now we do um, different different things. Can you hold on 1 second?
Sure. And we're
Okay,
back.
what was that last question?
Yeah, so you have boot camps all over Tucson now, right? Tell me a bit about your current business and what it's like.
Okay, well, we went from boot camp to eventually adding personal training. And after adding personal training, then we added nutrition coaching. And then after adding nutrition coaching, I wound up adding life coaching. Through all my life experiences and all the ups and downs and trials and tribulations, I actually, pardon me, I learned how to actually almost handle anything that was thrown at me. And what that enabled me to do is it enabled me to, and still to this day, be able to help people in their personal lives and their struggles, to be able to help them, like similar to Tony Robbins. He's my number one inspiration. Um, he's the man. So I always like to emulate and mimic him in many different ways. And we also offer recovery services like, cold plunge, red light therapy, sauna, massage, percussion, compression, body contouring. We have yoga as well, and nutrition. I'm a nutritionist now. So it's so many different things, personal training that we offer, and I love doing what I do. It's really cool to actually have a job that I actually get up and I love to do, that helps make me better in the process.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Um, I'm curious to know what you would tell someone who is struggling right now, who might have an addiction or might have a mental illness, um, and they're at that rock bottom, or they're struggling to kind of climb out of it. What would you, what's your advice to someone who's kind of in that position? Do you have any kind of wise words that you can share of maybe what helped you kind of switch your mindset? Um, I'm curious on your thoughts.
Well, everybody has a story, no matter what's going on in somebody's life. Um, what I like to do is I like to make my world really small and take take it one step at a time. One of the sayings is one day at a time. And if we could take it one day at a time, and sometimes one day is too long, is to break that one day down into a half a day. Like I can make it until lunchtime. And if that's too long, I can make it, 1 hour. And if 1 hour is too long, to break it down into a half hour and so forth, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, even a minute. Like I can get through this 1 minute right now and I'm going to be okay. And when you realize that you're so much more powerful than you give yourself credit for, that you can almost accomplish anything. Henry Ford says, if you say you can or you can't, both are right. So when you really look at it, anybody who is a great on this planet, they all started, like Gary Vaynerchuk says, everybody starts with 0 followers. And everybody had to start somewhere. And generally, anybody that's become really successful in today's world started off at a really rough spot, and it was always hard. So if you can just remember that, you know, that we're human, people make mistakes, and that yesterday is about depression and the future is anxiety. And if we can stay in the present moment, that's where the peace lies, and the power of the breath, by taking a breath. Because when we're getting anxious, we're worried about the impending doom of what's going to happen. If we could just take a breath and hold it for a moment and let it out really slow, we can engage the parasympathetic system. Because when we're anxious, we're in fight or flight mode. And that's one thing I learned about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. As a child, I learned to live in survival mode. And I didn't realize that into my adult life, I was in a survival fight or flight mentality. And that caused me to always be anxious. And what I did do for that, if you're having PTSD, I recommend that you go get this stuff called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprioritizing. And they put a light in front of your eye, and it helps you reorganize the trauma from the back part of your brain into the normal part of your brain that can process and then make it make sense instead of make it fight or flight. And when it comes to mental illness, you know, like bipolar disorder, a lot of people like to stigmatize people with mental illness and categorize and put them in a box with that stereotype. And what happens is that they don't help the person, they help the person become dysfunctional even more. Because when you look at yourself like, well, what's the use? I have a mental illness. What's the use? I'm addicted. I'm not going to quit anyways. I might as well just eat worms and be a victim. Because when you're a victim, what I really recommend is to be empowered. Is if you're a victim, you're blaming, you're lacking ownership, you're making excuses, or you're distrusting. Anytime you're any of those things, you're a victim. If you're empowered, you're trusting, you're accountable, you're responsible, and you're authentic. So one of the biggest and best things anybody can ever do is be what they want to be and be their true self that they've always been, that they've never been. And when we can realize that we can be our natural, authentic self, and then it's okay, because like Dr. Seuss said, the people that mind don't matter. And the people that matter, they don't mind. Because if you're going to be your true, authentic self, the people that stick around are the ones that matter. And a lot of times what I realized is that I spent the majority of my life worrying about what everyone else is going to think and what they're thinking. And when I realized that I got caught up in that mentality, I was always trying to be something that I wasn't in order to please a bunch of people that didn't matter, that didn't even really care anyway. Because when you look at it at the beginning of the day, if you wake up to please people, you're never going to please them, because whatever you're going to give them is never going to be good enough. If you wake up to be whoever you are, you're not going to please them either. But at the end of the day, when you're being your true self and who you are, that at least you hit the bed at night in the pillow, knowing that at the end of the day that you were your genuine, true, authentic self. And the more that we can do that a little bit by little bit, then we can start to breathe and realize some of the most successful people, you know, whether Van Damme, he has bipolar disorder, you know, Van Gogh, speaking of another Van, you know, Van Gogh, Sinead O'Connor, Catherine Zeta-Jones, you know, Michael Jordan had ADHD or has ADHD. You know, there's so many successful people out there in the world that have disorders, that have addictions, that have gotten through them and that manage them on a daily basis. And when you know that you're not alone and that some of the most successful people on the planet struggle psychologically, mentally, that it makes you feel like a part of a bigger collective and that there's help out there. And if you want the help bad enough and you want change, you can be the change you want to be. Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to be and ride the wave of change, or you're going to find yourself beneath it, because life is so freaking short. And that's one of the biggest things I realize. I'm 53 years old now, and this year I'll have 20 years off of crack cocaine. And I have a limited amount of time left. And when people really realize that their life is so short and that we get caught up in the past, is that the past doesn't necessarily make us who we are, even though it makes us who we are, but it doesn't define who we are. Is that if we can learn from the past, that we can make it experience. And when we got experience, we have knowledge, and it can help us to discern from making the wrong decisions in the present that will bring us a more profitable, like I meant to say fruitful, uh, more prosperous future. And prosperous doesn't always mean money. Many people associate success with money, but my biggest association with success is happiness. And the takeaway here is self-love. And if you can watch on how you speak to yourself, if we learn how to speak to ourselves in a kinder, softer, more loving way, and to give ourselves grace, then we'll be that much better with everyone around us. And that's my biggest thing I learned in the last year. And it's called, you start doing that with yourself, and then you can treat others in the way they want to be treated. That's called the platinum rule. The golden rule I used to do is treat others as I want to be treated. Well, that doesn't always work because not everybody wants to be treated like Randy. So when we start to treat others the way that they deserve and want to be treated, then the world is an oyster and it starts opening up for you. And you realize is that we worry and have worried about a bunch of stuff that's never going to happen, or it didn't happen anyway. So those were some of my thoughts, is that don't ever give up, because you're worthy and you are enough.
I think we should leave it at that because that was a fantastic answer. Thanks for joining. I think this was packed full of a ton of knowledge, useful tools, and a lot of relatable content that I think a lot of people can learn a lot from. So I just want to thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing your story. I'm proud of you, man.
Well,
You're
thank
doing
you
some
very
really
much.
great
And
stuff.
thank you. And you're more than welcome. Thank you for the opportunity and to touch and inspire others.
Awesome. I'm glad we could. Thanks, Randy.
You're welcome.